Buenas tardes, good afternoon. É com imenso prazer e orgulho que apresento Marilda do Couto Cavalcanti, professora que fará a última plenária de nossa inesquecível, inspiradora e inquietante AILA. Considerando sua longa e engajada participação acadêmica e política, Marilda Cavalcanti dispensaria apresentações. Destacarei alguns pontos e deixarei que ela fale por si mesma. Graduada em Letras Anglo-Portuguesa pela Universidade Estadual de Londrina, com mestrado em Linguística Aplicada pela PUC São Paulo e doutorado em Linguística Aplicada pela Universidade de Lancaster, é professora titular da Universidade Estadual de Campinas e pesquisadora A1 do CNPq. Com uma produção intelectual expressiva, she has published several relevant books and papers nationally and internationally. She has also supervised more than 50 postgraduate students, and many of them are professors and supervisors contributing to the dissemination of a transdisciplinary applied linguistics. She was also responsible for the implementation of a new field of investigation in applied linguistics in Brazil, which is occupied with the linguistic minorities and Brazilian cultures. Currently, she has been developing ethnographical research focused mainly on this context or context seen as minority. In these scenarios, based on meta-theoretical and meta-methodological reflections, her research interests are on reading, literacy, identities, diversity, difference, and mainly teacher education in those contexts. She is one of the most renowned Brazilian applied linguists, not only for her intellectual production, but also for her efforts to the implementation and recognition of applied linguistics as a research area. In this sense, she was one of the founding members and the first president of AILA, our Brazilian Applied Linguistics Association. And from 2003 to 2009, she was the AILA vice president. Ainda tratando de sua atuação política, Marilda Cavalcanti foi cofundadora em 2002 do GT Transculturalidade, Linguagem e Educação da ANCOL, que agrega pesquisadores interessados em conduzir investigações junto a diferentes populações linguísticas e culturalmente marginalizadas em nossa sociedade. Em reconhecimento à sua dedicação e suas contribuições para a área, na última segunda-feira, a estudiosa foi indicada como membro honorária da AILA, e não é por acaso que também foi convidada para fazer a última plenária de nossa AILA. Passo então a palavra a Marilda Cavalcanti, que falará sobre desafios éticos e epistemológicos do trabalho com margens multidiversas. Thank you.
Well, I would like to greet you all and thank you for being here in this last day of this conference, a conference that I have really enjoyed and heard so many good comments about it. I would like also to thank the organizing committee for having invited me, of AILA Rio 2017, for having invited me to deliver this talk. Well, the title of the presentation is on the slide, and I would like to emphasize, let's say, or to begin with, a focus on diversity, margins, and the South and applied linguistics. To do this, I'm going to spend some time on these three quotations, which I have chosen for the epigraphs. Then I begin with bell hooks in a book published in 1984. To be in the margins is to be part of the whole, but outside the main body. I like this quotation because it reminds me that if one is in the margin, sometimes this person is and sometimes the person is not in the whole. And when you aren't in the whole, I think I would add that in the margin you may be invisibilized or excluded. And I think with this I would introduce some of the key words for my talk today. So invisibilization is one of the main, let's say, the main worries, one in relation to the margins. The second quotation by Sarah Ahmed, 2012. The promise of diversity could be described as a problem. The sign of inclusion makes the signs of inclusion disappear. And again, I see this quotation as complementing the first quotation, the quotation by Bell Hooks. Diversity here, as well as inclusion, have been embraced as solutions to existing problems, at schools, for instance. And we have seen this in Brazil. The solution, in inverted commas, has turned out in new problems, in inverted commas as well. In other words, both diversity and inclusion may be or can be used as narratives of homogenization and also exclusion. The groups in the margins may be narrated as good or evil, depending on the narrator's interest or interests. And to say something about my theoretical perspective or positioning, the epigraph I have is by Boaventura Sousa Santos. It's a quotation where he says, I propose as an epistemological, political and cultural orientation. Better? I propose as an epistemological, political and cultural orientation that we defamiliarize ourselves with the imperial north and that we learn with the south. But I warn you that the south itself is a product of the empire, and for that reason, learning with the south equally requires defamiliarization in relation to everything that in the south comes from the colonial relationship. Then, okay. So, in my introduction then, continuing, in alignment with Boaventura Sousa Santos, 2008, but actually in a paper delivered in 2004, I used the term South, in inverted commas, as now quotation marks, as a metaphor of human suffering caused by capitalist modernity. End of quotations. On this, I would say, see also Hugh, 2017. This suffering is in most part due to what the Brazilian social geographer Milton Santos, 20,000, had referred to as perverse globalization, a globalization that contributes to the increase of social and economic inequality. Actually, this inequality happens both in the south and in the north, because there is a south in the north and a north in the south. If this increase of inequalities happens in central or the so-called developed countries, it is even more evident in countries that are seen as semi-peripheral, a term used by Boaventura Santos based on Wallerstein. According to the author, Santos, semi-peripheral countries, Brazil included, have unstable economies but are more open to experimentation with the development of social programs, actions. As you all know, as it's been widely mentioned, we are now in Brazil undergoing a severe economic recession and have a high unemployment rate, over 13%, which means over 14 million people unemployed. And we have had the development of various social programs, many of which have now been discontinued. The increase of social and economic inequalities exposes marginalized groups and also pushes new groups to the margins of society. It should be pointed out, however, that these margins are not homogeneous, not even within groups. This is why I refer to them as being multidiverse, bringing up the differences existing in diversities. For example, regarding social and linguistic aspects and social and linguistic rights. Am I talking about multilingualism in Brazil? Yes, I am. But, of course, if you ask around, you are likely to be told that the only language spoken in the country is Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. More on this subject is in Cavalcanti and Marilda press. I'm not going to make any detailment of this here. You see, Brazil, as many other countries in the world, has successfully constructed myths to materialize its one language, one nation state. One of its most naturalized myths is that of monolingualism in Portuguese. And I dealt with this in 1999 and also in 2016. And this monolingualism encompasses the hegemony of standard norm, leaving non-standard languages, including the so-called Portuguese varieties, to be seen as deviations, to be seen as illegitimate languages. And I should go back to the word varieties here, because I have used it in inverted commas. And I do so because I see the term as inappropriate. I see varieties as languages on their own. Brazilian monolingualism Brazilian monolingualism also either invisibilizes or depreciates other languages spoken in the country, mainly if they are related to minorities. Only hegemonic foreign languages are acknowledged as languages to be learned. Another myth that strengthens the unity of the state is that of the country's idealized diversity. The country actually only acknowledges its initial formation by Europeans, indigenous peoples, and Africans. Africans in inverted commas. No mention is made to the fact that the indigenous peoples were the landowners when the Europeans arrived. And no mention is made to the fact that the Africans were brought to the country against their will, in a forced diaspora, as Santos and Secheti, 2016 say. And here I should also explain why I used Africans in inverted commas. I have done so because in Brazil the reference is usually made as if they were a homogeneous bloc, no matter where they came from, no matter what languages they spoke. There is no room for different countries, different groups, or even individuals in the official discourse. What is actually observed is that this initial mixing of Europeans, indigenous peoples, and Africans are is deleted to give room to idealized and stereotyped representations of subaltern groups. These myths are part of the collective imaginary and have been the focus of politically incorrect jokes. Actually, these myths seem to be even more crystallized in times of globalization. What is seen as a country that has advanced legislation regarding the inclusion of minority languages and cultural diversities, but that in practice has a lot of problems regarding aspects of human rights. These aspects, as already mentioned, are here shown as margins that are multidiverse. Given this scenario, I should put forward my alignment with a furtent of applied linguistics that's open to transdisciplinary dialogues, Metamorphosis 2006, and applied linguistics that I see as carrying a social and questioning imprint. The questioning part of this imprint derives from my alignment with a post-colonialist view. I cite again Santos 2008, and serves as a basis for my taking a critical stance when looking at the margins that are part of the construction of an unequal Brazil. In other words, these margins, to quote Bell Hooks again, quotation, are part of the whole, but outside the main body, end of quotation. The focus of this presentation is on ethical, methodological, and theoretical challenges that have permeated my research path while investigating some scenarios seen as marginal in Brazil. I have organized my talk in 3 parts. First, I present my trajectory through some of these Brazilian margins, with emphasis on an indigenous scenario. Then I focus on the backstage of a long-standing ethnographic research I've developed in an indigenous teacher education course in the state of Acre, in Amazonia. To do so, I bring in meta-comments on methodological aspects, and theoretical concepts relevant for data analysis. Thirdly, I turn to my present research interest, that is on recent migration in Brazil, with a focus on Haitian migrants. And here you have the, on the slide is the summary of my presentation. So, after these 3 parts, I'll have some final remarks. Then the first part, my research trajectory through some margins, with emphasis on the indigenous scenario. Back in the 1990s, in doing applied linguistics in Brazil, it was not very common to look at the margins of society. In Brazilian academy, other subjects, mainly the ones related to hardcore linguistics, were more valued. It was at that time that I made a turn in my academic career and started looking at, or working at, an indigenous scenario. At that time, it was not only the focus of my research that was marginal, but also the methodology chosen, that is, ethnography. As such, every time I submitted a research proposal to a funding body, a detailed explanation of ethnography had to be added. Margins thus entered as a choice in my academic trajectory. First, through an indigenous teacher education course in Acre, a state in the northwestern part of Amazonia. The course was part of an educational project pioneerly developed by CPI Acre. CPI Acre means Committee Pro-Indigenous Peoples from Acre. And this committee is a non-religious, non-governmental Brazilian organization. And they worked with in-service indigenous teachers who were trying to get their the official accreditation of their profession. There were about 12 to 25 indigenous peoples in this course, and 8 to 10 ethnic groups, and 8 to 10 different languages as well. And these and these 10 to 25 indigenous teachers were Ashininka, Jaminawa, Katukina, Kashinawa, Nawa, Shawandawa, Yawanawa, just to name some. They spoke different indigenous languages, and at least 2 of these groups had Portuguese as a first language. Portuguese was also the lingua franca of the group. This course was the locus of the ethnographic fieldwork I carried out for over 10 years. There I had a dual role as a researcher and also as a volunteer teacher-educator. My fieldwork lasted 1 to 3 weeks a year, in each edition of this yearly course. The course took place in the months of January and February, and that coincided with the summer break at the university I'm affiliated with, State University of Campinas. Throughout the years, a research group was formed mainly with students of mine attending the Applied Linguistics postgraduate program at the University of Campinas. In dialogue with the members of the research group and also with other groups around the country, there was a demand to look beyond the indigenous scenarios. Both in conferences and events, there have been some queries about the fact that only indigenous peoples were focused in the research. People working with descendants of early migrants in the country, as well as people researching deaf people's education, started claiming the need to include these scenarios in the concern of the research group. This inclusion was mainly done through the research work of doctoral students that I supervised throughout the years. Later, with the gradual discontinuation of the with the Indigenous Educational Project in Acre, since most Indigenous students had been accepted in regular university special Indigenous undergraduate courses, I had more time to invest in other scenarios. And that was done through the focus on multidiversity and multilingualism in minority contexts, as well as in majority contexts, treated as if they were minorities. For example, students in public schools in the country who do not speak what's considered standard Portuguese. Then I go on to the second part. The backstage of the ethnographic research developed meta-methodological and meta-theoretical comments on challenges. Challenges have to be dealt with, and this implies making choices. And choices were made. If they are the right choices, only time can tell. So far, I'm quite happy with the choices made. But things do change, and I'm also happy to be open to changes. Then I focus here on some of these methodological and theoretical challenges encountered in the ethnographic work in the Indigenous Teacher Education course in Amazonia. A methodological look at the research developed in the Indigenous Teacher Education course shows an ethnographic fieldwork, or a language ethnography, that always had my involvement as part of the research. That is, I was part of the interactions I had to analyze, for instance. This was a methodological challenge that I have welcomed. It was difficult in the beginning, mainly when it was data analysis time. To look at the other is usually easier than to look at oneself. But this continued practice made myself more careful, more aware of other people's sensibilities, and made me aware also of my slips into condescension and also ingrained beliefs, including prejudice. This continued practice was part of a permanent learning and permanent awareness towards doing observation. The main challenge I have faced, however, was that of playing the dual role of teacher and researcher. Or I should say teacher-educator. While I was doing the fieldwork, my main focus had to be on the teaching, on classroom activities. And the writing of the field notes, for instance, had to be left for the hours spent on a plane on the 3 to 4 hour long trip back home. I should add that once the role of teacher-educator changed to the role of research supervisor, that is, the story goes like this. Many a time had I asked the indigenous teachers whether they would like to take part of the research group I coordinated. The answer had always been negative. But one day, one of them, a Kashinawa teacher, in the middle of a class, and just out of the blue, asked 2 questions. The first one was, what is a project? And the second one, what does it mean to do research? The Kashinawa teacher said that there were always people from the university or from the universities going to the villages, not only to his own village, but to his colleagues as well, and going to the villages and saying they wanted to develop a project or else to do research. He said, he and the other teachers agreed, he wanted to learn about it, to be able to do the research himself and themselves. I answered the first question, and we agreed they were going to learn about doing research in the following edition of the course in the following year. I should also say that the committee, Pro-Indigenous Peoples of Acre, also designed a workshop for them to learn how to deal and how to design non-research projects. Then, going back to the doing research thing, as agreed, together we designed a collective ethnographic activity or work to look at their own schools and classrooms. The work included the writing of field notes on classroom observation and interviewing members of the community. The field notes ended up being written retrospectively when they came back for the next edition of the course. That was not the initial plan. The plan was for them to write the field notes while they were in the villages. And then a methodological adjustment in what we had agreed had to be made. These teachers, or these indigenous teachers, are very good observers, and they do not have to learn how to do it. And it is actually part of their survival in the forest, otherwise they wouldn't survive. And their observation is very rich in detail. So when they said they had not written the notes, we started talking about it, and they came out with very detailed and very rich observation. And then I saw that that could be something that they could write retrospectively. This is also part of what I called challenge in doing the work with them. As to the preparation of the data sources for analysis, the transcription of audio and video recordings, have received extra attention and care in anticipation of prospective readers' possible misrepresentation of the indigenous teachers. And now I'm talking about my own preparation of data, so to speak, for presenting in papers and also in events. Fine transcriptions, when not relevant for the analysis, and when indicating the use of non-standard Portuguese, were usually replaced by a translation into standard Portuguese. To avoid comments such as, for example, these teachers cannot write or cannot speak Portuguese. And I would say that this is one of the issues that always represented a challenge for us in the group. And these also go, for instance, to data related to deaf people's scenario. I usually find it very embarrassing and very something that shouldn't really be done, because you just build a representation of the other as not able either to speak or to write. Then, as to some issues that could in any way show their vulnerability, these were omitted in anticipation of the use by anti-indigenous movements or any other people in situations that we could not foresee. Regarding meta-theoretical comments, beyond what I have already stated in the introductions about the vertent of applied linguistics I'm aligned with, I would add that the theoretical concepts that have been more relevant in my trajectory, I think I would have to go back in this. I would like to add that theoretical concepts that have been more relevant in my academic trajectory have actually been more relevant than the theories themselves. Then I would say that the theoretical concepts are more important than, for myself, than being tied up to one only theory. So then I begin with the concept of multilingualism. I view it as relevant in the way it is put forward in the new sociolinguistics of multilingualism. And I refer to Martin Jones' Black Badge and Crease, 2012. Because this concept of multilingualism derives from a critique of the basic concept of language I had already had a go at in a paper by Cavalcanti and Cesar in 2004, when we, the authors, put forward a view of language as a kaleidoscope. In contrast to views of language that predominate in national and regional language policies and institutions, the distinction between good, appropriate, or legitimate languages. The languages, a kaleidoscope, is put forward as multifaceted, as a kaleidoscope of resources. Even single languages can be thought of as comprising multiple resources. Then, the issue of standard and non-standard languages is part of the ideology of monolingualism that is so well established in Brazil, intermingled with the ideology of one nation, one identity, one people. And then we go over to the third part. From a focus on indigenous studies to a focus on migrant studies. Then back to my research trajectory in 2015, in the wake of international media news on migration towards Europe that were part of Brazilian TV news, there were glimpses of migration in Brazil as well. It called my attention that Haitians and Syrians were mentioned in the recent migration to Brazil. What called my attention was that these migrants had been here for already a couple of years when they started making the media. And I wanted to know what was going on, and I decided to have a look at the media before, just in a preamble to seeing whether I would like to do an ethnographic research on this site. But to talk about migrants in Brazil, I would have to bring in a little digression to place migrant studies in perspective. Brazil A brief overview of immigration to Brazil. Until the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, there was planned immigration, to bring labor work to rural zones in the country. Italians, Portuguese, Spanish, and Japanese were contracted to work in coffee plantations, replacing enslaved laborers. And planned immigration for the development of urban centers. And then there was Spanish, Syrian, and Lebanese, among other nationalities. After that, there was quite a long period in which migration was not really mentioned, but it continued happening. In the 1970s, there was reduced migration, and historians call this a low impact in migration. In the 1990s, there were Latin American migration flows, mainly Colombians, Bolivians, and Peruvians. And back to my focus, back to my trajectory, in the early 2010s, migration in times of contemporary globalization was really seen. And then there was an increase in requests for refugee visas and also for visas on humanitarian grounds. As we all know, migration flows happen more frequently in the contemporary world than they happened in the past. And the landscapes change more quickly than before. The phenomenon is fostered by technological advances and represents changes in flux. These changes, many a time, are difficult to understand and to follow. So, here's what's been happening in Brazil. There is a comparison of the number of refugee visa requests and the number of concessions between 2010 and 2013. I find it important to add that the figures, whenever they refer to the margins, are usually estimates. In the case of the indigenous peoples, not always have they declared their ethnicity to the census people agents. They had been told in the past that it was shameful to say that they were indigenous, though they wouldn't say. Only recently they are saying so. Same goes for indigenous languages. They were not acknowledged as languages, they were referred to as slangs. In the case of migrants, if they enter the country illegally, if they are undocumented, the best way out is to be invisible. And besides this, the census only takes place every 10 years. In this changing time, many things happen in such a period of time. than the number of refugees in Brazil. Then, just to give you an idea here, according to the Ministry of Justice, Brazil 2014, there were about 5,208 refugees, half of them Colombians and Angolans. And Brazil has a population of more than 200 million inhabitants. In 2014, the estimated number of foreigners, refugees included, in the country was 0.5% of the total population, which is very low. This estimated number is less than the Brazilian diaspora to the USA, Europe, and Asia. Brazil is part of UNHCR, the United Nations Refugee Agency, a program for the relocation of refugees. The country has signed an agreement to receive foreign nationals who have had provisional refuge in another country and that have to migrate to a third country. This is the case of Colombians who were in Ecuador, for instance. Haitian migration started after the earthquake that devastated the island, that was already going through a social and economic crisis. And then I go back to what I've said before. It started in 2010, but I haven't seen much of this in the news before 2013. And Haitian migrants are not, they are not granted a refugee visa, but a humanitarian visa, or visa on humanitarian grounds. And also a work permit. The ones who entered the country illegally sometimes had to wait for a month before they get these documents. The journey to Brazil. And as you see, these are quotes from the media that I have. The best way to get a permanent visa at the Brazilian embassy in Haiti and come by plane to Sao Paulo. The flight takes 11 hours and the ticket costs about 3,000 reais. The illegal journey through Panama and the Brazilian state of Acre costs about 1,200 reais and can place the migrants in the hands of human traffickers. And this is the route. So from Haiti to Sao Paulo. And Acre would be over here. And this is what would be important here is that the news just mentions that these people are entering in Brazil illegally. And the fact is that the difficulty for Haitians to migrate is not only to pay the price of the air ticket, but also to get a job out of the construction industry. Most migrants complain about the low salaries they're offered. So, in 2015, there were about 13,000 Haitians, 10% of the total migrants in Brazil. The previous estimate was that there would be 50,000 Haitians by the end of 2014. Haitian migrants are mainly men aging between 18 and 50 years old. Of course, as the years went by, their families started coming around as well. They were in about 286 Brazilian cities. 70% were in São Paulo, 10% in Belo Horizonte, and 10% in Manaus. What I found is that facts that were very objective could be found on the media, but mainly published online. I started then looking at blogs, individual blogs, and also blogs that were tied up to mainstream newspapers in Brazil, be them right-wing or left-wing. And what I found out was that more interesting than the news itself were the comments that came to comment the posts on the blogs. But before I get into that, there is also this slide showing that the work of social entities. Without the intense work of social entities, religious NGOs whose work includes monitoring against slave work, some of these migration flows would have become real humanitarian crises. Some of these NGOs are also religious, as you're going to see in the following slide. Haitian migration continues, but according to Chris Paris, director of Missão Paz Peace Mission, integration of Haitians in Brazilian society is still precarious. Many live in slums and cheap hotels. You may be asking yourselves whether there is any law of migration. And the only law that existed was a very old one, and it had been made during the dictatorship in Brazil, and saw the foreigner as an enemy. But anyway, it was. There were discussions about a new law, and there is now a law of migration. But this new law of migration was only approved on May 25th, 2017. But then, going back to what I said, that I found most interesting than actually the news in the newspapers. Perhaps I shouldn't really say interesting, but I should say that what I found in these blogs are really related to racism in Brazil and to racialization. There was a piece of news saying, Haitian migrants suffer racism and xenophobia in Brazil. In one case, a Haitian migrant told a story about having been verbally offended. He added that the person who acted in a racist way thought he couldn't understand what was being said because in the city, in southern Brazil, people had the habit of mixing German and Portuguese. And then Haitian migrants suffer racism and xenophobia in Brazil. In another case, a group of Haitians accompanied by a social assistant was at an underground station in the city of Sao Paulo. The people around addressed her, saying that those people, the Haitians, should go back to their own country. But this is not usually commonly found in the newspapers. I'm also going to mention a comment on a blog that I saw in July 2013. The commentator says, "How about Brazilians? It's as if Haitians are not respecting the order in a line. Millions of Brazilians in need are being left aside. Isn't it easier to wake up and see that Brazil is not ready to receive this amount of people?" And then I go back, to what appeared on an open TV channel. Early 2015, the rate of unemployment was on the rise and there were signs of an economic crisis. On May 20, 2015, a piece of news on Haitian migrants arriving in São Paulo appeared on an open TV channel, and the highlight was, "There are no job opportunities now." It somehow seemed to me that they were saying, how good it is. Now we think that this is going to stop. But they wouldn't say that, but somehow it was implied. And, and then it was said, Brazil is not one of the main destinations of Haitian migrants anymore. And that was followed by the following, by this information. Arrivals in Brazil, the numbers are estimated to 2014, 2,000 per month. 2016, less than 30 per month. Many Haitians are leaving the country in search for jobs in other countries. Then some comments on the news. These news on the Haitian migrants were very intermittent, and somehow I thought that this was a way to invisibilize them. Whenever I talk to people on the streets and ask them about Haitian migrants and other migrants, they were usually surprised. They would say, "But there are not migrants in Brazil, and there are no Haitians around." And I found that this happens still today in Campinas. I've never seen any mention in the local newspaper. And you hear from other people that they're working here and there, but you don't see people talking about them unless they say something like these. I heard about some Haitian migrants that were around, but they just passed through this city. They actually were employed on a farm very far away from here, just like saying, they're not here. And this reminds me very much about the talks about Indians, okay? Indigenous peoples, when I was working with them, and people asked me about them, they would say, "But they're so far away. Do they really exist? Are you sure?" Then, I'm now more interested in the comments on these blog posts than in the news themselves that I said to you. And And I think I should be going to my final remark, shouldn't I? Because it's... Sorry about this. Then, I hope I have succeeded in showing some of the backstage of my research work. I value this backstage because it's my source for reflexivity. There was a lot to learn in the fieldwork in the Indigenous Teacher Education course, the Indigenous scenario. And I'm sure there is and there will be a lot more to learn in the migrant scenario. Investing in non-mainstream scenarios, i.e. in the margins, means one has to be prepared to tread on an unknown route. For example, as a researcher, one is not likely to be a mere observer. Sometime you have to make a social commitment to the group. But this does not mean you are going to be one of them. In the Indigenous scenario, for example, the Indigenous teachers reminded me more than once that I was not one of them. I was no doubt an outsider. I was perhaps an ally, a provisional one, in their empowering trajectory. And this trajectory was started with the work of the NGO. They have been working with the African indigenous people since the 1980s. It was amazing to work with these indigenous teachers and to follow their requests according to their own timing and interests. Many a time, these requests were not made in a direct way, and I would only understand them when I was away from the fieldwork, rewriting my field notes, reading the field notes, getting ready to do the data analysis. Margins are usually made invisible in society. Margins segregate, margins exclude. I feel that more research from within, and I use these expressions, research from within, in reference to Linda Tuhiwai-Smith, 1999. More research from within, group members from the margins, are important to make people visible and empowered. It should be pointed out that research from within has already been started, not only in indigenous scenarios, but also in deaf people scenarios in Brazil. And I think this is very promising. Voices from inside the groups are important and have to make their way to institutions. I here go back to my initial positioning towards an applied linguistics with a social imprint. There are other margins around and about that will be made invisible. I remember once having asked my undergraduate students in a teacher education course to observe their daily routines on the way to the university and at the university, to report on the people not seen, i.e. those who were or are naturalized as invisible. To their own surprise, most of them pointed out the presence of the cleaning staff of the university as unseen. And then some implications regarding research in AL. I'm just finishing. In this AL with a social imprint, I would like to see more research from within, as put forward by Smith, 1999, more long-standing ethnographic research, because so far only statistically based research have served to implement public policies in Brazil, and more action research not on minority groups or communities. And these actions should actually be on things of the group's interests. The action research itself could be the basis for the development of individual or group research. In these changing times, and also gloomy times, when we witness the surfacing of nationalist, xenophobic, racist and racialized, not to mention homophobic and misogynist discourses, the margins become even more vulnerable and need more attention. I take this as a challenge ahead, and I keep my fingers crossed for some light at the metaphorical end of the tunnel in Brazil and in the world. I'm just going to say the ending in Portuguese, and then I'll finish. Então, nesse mundo mutante e também muito sombrio, quando se vê aparecer os discursos nacionalistas, xenofóbicos, racistas e racializados, para não mencionar os discursos homofóbicos e misóginos, as margens se tornam ainda mais vulneráveis e precisam de muita atenção. Eu tomo isto como sendo um desafio à nossa frente. E eu torço para que haja alguma luz no fim do túnel, tanto no Brasil quanto no mundo. Obrigada. Thank you.